The number of single people in temporary accommodation in Bedford has gone up by more than 5,000% since 2013. And that's against a national average increase of just 200%. I say just, that's still tripling. But against 5,000%, clearly there is a big difference between those two figures. And the reason for that, as far as we can tell, and it has been said in the Housing Committee publicly, that it was on the back of the complaints and compensation payouts and just general exposure to these systemic issues in Bedford Borough Council that led them to changing direction. And somewhere in the middle of 2017, it seems they made a decision that they're actually going to try and follow the law. And the law is very onerous. There's no getting around that. It says it specifically. HOTAC's a good example of that. Supreme Court says that this law is onerous, and essentially you cannot determine whether or not someone, for example, is in priority need based on how much resources you have. It's an objective test. It's got nothing to do with your resources. And so this is why we're seeing councils across the country actually getting to a point where they're spending more than half their entire budget on temporary accommodation. And that might seem outrageous, and it is outrageous. There's a lot of reasons why that's very inefficient. A lot of the ways councils have done that is by just kind of doing hand-to-mouth high payments to very unscrupulous landlords in some cases, and basically paying through the nose for that temporary accommodation. All of this is against the background of them just selling off their housing stock over the last few decades, which again is a political decision. And again, this situation we're now in, it was entirely foreseeable when that stuff was done. But here we are, and here Bedford is, having increased its TA stock by more than 5,000%. And what that's led to is a number of unintended consequences, potentially the most significant of which is that as the number of single people increased in Bedford, because the council was correctly applying the Section 108 and Section 184 thresholds, it basically led to an increase in the number of voids that local charity and limited companies providing supported accommodation, or so-called supported accommodation I should probably say. And basically what that did was, rather than them sitting back and saying, right, brilliant, the need for our service is dropping off, we have always planned for this because we always intended to end homelessness, so that we're therefore going to enact this plan that we've got to essentially reduce the capacity of our supported accommodation. Unfortunately, this is the real world where they didn't do that. Instead, what they did was they said, right, we've got all these voids, we're losing all this money. So what they basically did was they widened the net and they started taking people in from further and further afield. And what that meant was, if you lived in one of the surrounding areas like Leafy, Central Bedfordshire, for example, and you became homeless, I'm not saying that you would definitely be gatekept in Central Bedfordshire. I've not had that much dealings with them actually. I have seen them gatekeep these, so it wouldn't surprise me if there were systemic issues there. So they approach Central Bedfordshire Council, they get brushed off. They then try and apply for the supported accommodation that's in Central Bedfordshire, but it's very limited relative to somewhere like Bedford, which has a lot of supported accommodation. So they're still stuck. They have to wait a long time to get in there. They're homeless. But what they then find out is some helpful person in Central Bedfordshire basically says, don't worry mate, there's some accommodation for you available in Bedford Borough. And effectively what was happening was there was literally cases where people would get the keys the same day because the charities wanted to minimise the amount of money they were losing from these voids. And for me, this is one of the many things which just exposes the heart of a lot of charities, in that they are not there to end homelessness. They're not really about ending homelessness. They're about sustaining the charity, and they'll therefore kind of hoover up anyone from anywhere who actually would much rather live in Central Bedford. So if you've been living in Central Bedfordshire and you become homeless, the chances are your entire life is in Central Bedfordshire, you're going to prefer to live there. But what the Bedford Borough Supported Accommodation providers did was they made it easy for people to migrate to Bedford. And it's not just been since 2017. In the time I've been working in the sector since 2005, I've known hundreds of people to essentially come from surrounding areas, sometimes being sent specifically from surrounding areas, mentioning no names, Milton Keynes, but basically been sent here and they end up accruing local connection here legitimately. They then lose that accommodation for some reason. I mean, Just Us has supported people to show that they were legally homeless whilst in this supported accommodation because it was unreasonable to continue to occupy, because the quality of support was so bad, because they were being exploited, because it was just having such a dramatically negative impact on the mental health. And so they essentially ended up approaching Bedford Borough Council, who at this point was not able to refer people back to their home areas because they now had a local connection to Bedford Borough and have effectively taken up accommodation in Bedford Borough where they would have preferred to have lived somewhere else. And Bedford Borough Council was essentially drowning in this financial problem that this has all caused. And Bedford Borough Council still seems to be in denial about the fact that there were these systemic issues up until and onwards from 2017, to be honest. I mean, there's still been cases of gatekeeping in the last year, so it's not like it's completely been eliminated. And the question for me is, how many times do these isolated failures have to happen before the council will admit there was a systemic issue? Because by denying the reality of the fact there was a systemic issue and there was a systemic change, which is all good, they basically undermine democracy in the first place, because it's fairly dishonest to do that. but also they have not been able to have honest conversations with these local charities, with these local limited companies that provide supported accommodation that cost the actual council itself a huge amount of money every year, like millions of pounds, because it's not regulated, a lot of it, and therefore essentially Bedford Borough Council has to top it all up. So that's coming out of local council tax funded services rather than central government. And so because there is not that honesty in that dialogue, charities genuinely were scratching their heads because they're sort of saying, why have we got all these voids? You know, we've seen the news, we've seen the fact that homelessness is going up, and yet we've got all these voids. And because Bedford Borough Council have not been honest about their situation and what's actually happened, they have not been able to bring the charity sector along with them in this journey of trying to actually get the law to work. And this is where we've ended up. And I've raised this a number of times with Bedford Borough Council, and I didn't get anywhere. So last night I actually went to the full council meeting, which is the first time I've been to full council, partly because they cancelled the housing committee last month, and partly because it's really time sensitive. Because the other thing that's going to happen potentially later this year or maybe early next year is the Supported Housing Act 2023, which hasn't been fully enacted yet, essentially has this criteria within it which says if someone is evicted from supported accommodation and wasn't provided with adequate support, which would apply to loads of different supported accommodation providers, because when you actually scratch the surface you see how little support they really give, effectively it makes it impossible for the council to find them intentionally homeless. Which from my point of view is a great thing, by the way. It's going to be very helpful to get people housed, but from Bedford Borough Council's situation, what's going to happen is someone comes from Central Beds or Milton Keynes or North Northampton or whatever, moves into poor quality supported accommodation because it's just an open door, and they then get evicted, but they're not intentionally homeless because they haven't been supported properly. By this time they basically accrued local connection, and then they approach Bedford Borough Council, who's going to owe them the main duty, and this is a serious problem for Bedford Borough Council. So I'm not saying that people should not be able to move around the country, by the way. I guess there are situations where clearly someone might want to actually move to a different area because they want to get away from negative associations, they want to get away from abuse and harassment. No problem with that at all. But the majority of people who become homeless would much prefer to be housed by their own council. And if you are in any way naive about this, I suggest you read the Brentwood Council LGO report that was published earlier this year in January, where essentially Brentwood Council, which is a fairly unremarkable council in many ways, pretty sure it's in a legal aid desert, which might be significant, but effectively out of 220 odd cases the LGO looked into, only like 18 of them were actually dealt with lawfully. So there's like 90% unlawful rate of support being given. And I would not be surprised at all if surrounding areas to Bedford and elsewhere in the country are going to have the same kinds of systemic issues happening. That's essentially what we're seeing in Bedford. Although I don't think in Bedford it was ever quite as high as 90%. I think it was more maybe like something like 50%. But of those 50%, it was going to be the people who are the most vulnerable who were in that 50% who were left homeless unlawfully. So yeah, so I've got the video here from last night's full council meeting. As I say, first time I've been to full council, there was a bit more bells and whistles with it than the housing committee. You know, there was literally someone ringing a bell at the beginning. We had to all stand up, and then there's some golden scepter was brought in or something, and they put it down. People wearing chains and all that sort of thing. And it was obviously a lot busier, so it was a bit more intimidating to ask the question. But the councillors are good in Bedford in terms of coming over beforehand and just kind of saying hello or whatever, just kind of putting you a little bit at ease. And I was one of 6 people asking questions. My question ended up being the shortest. I mean, it's half a page of A4. I thought it was going to be the longest, but there was a lot of longer questions that were being asked. And effectively, it was a good platform to raise the issue with the wider councillors. There's something like 40. There's only 10 of them or so who actually come to the housing committee. But because it's such a significant impact financially for the council, they all need to know about this stuff because they have not been keeping track of it. When I've had conversations with senior officers at the council, they have not been recording the stuff, even though they do actually have the data up their sleeve if they went looking for it, because they have the 5-year address histories of those who approached them under Part 6 and Part 7. So they could do an exercise to see how many people are coming from somewhere else, getting local connection through supported accommodation in Bedford, and then approaching the council for help down the line and basically being housed. So yeah, so it's been a bit frustrating to see their lack of action on this. I guess it's true to say that many councils are too busy chopping wood to sharpen the axe, but for me this is probably one of the only legitimate things to focus in on for the council to actually bring those temporary accommodation numbers down. If they don't engage with these supported accommodation providers and find some way to stem this flow, and there are legitimate ways they can do that, then they are going to continue to be swamped, or they're going to have to revert to gatekeeping, one of the two. And obviously I hope it's the first one. I hope they engage with those legitimate avenues they've got to push back on these surrounding councils, get councils like Central Beds and Milton Keynes and wherever to fully follow the law. I'm sure Central Beds and Milton Keynes would be outraged that I've suggested they don't, but as I say, I've seen evidence certainly from Central Beds myself, and there's a lot of second-hand evidence I've heard from Milton Keynes that it's a problem. As I say, in the SWEP in Bedford, they're receiving people from Milton Keynes that literally just been sent over to Bedford. as a way of just kind of getting rid of people. So it's all rather complicated, but Bedford Borough Council's lack of authenticity in talking about this issue and the fact that this temporary accommodation capacity has gone up by so much and the reasons behind it has inhibited that honest conversation within the sector. And I'm sure, I anticipate that a lot of these supported accommodation providers won't budge because they'll say, oh, we need to keep these void numbers down. But there will be some stuff that can be done about that. And ultimately there will be some providers who actually say, okay, fair enough, we need to plan for the future, we need to work out how are we going to reduce our capacity so that we don't have all these voids as homelessness numbers do drop down in Bedford. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting thing to kind of continue with. I'm sure this won't be the last video I do about it. But yeah, as I say, hopefully this is helpful. And if you care about homelessness and you have not asked a question in a public council meeting, then I would suggest it is an amazingly effective way of getting systemic change, because unless you do that, a lot of the councillors who are probably pretty good people, decent people, they just don't know about it. They just get fed this nonsense from charities that homelessness is all caused by individual failures, individual support needs, drug and alcohol issues, all this stuff. And actually there's very little correlation, let alone causation, between those kinds of issues. The vast majority of people who are homeless do not use drugs or alcohol or anything like that. They are homeless because of systemic issues, lack of housing, rapidly increasing rents, very poor quality in both social and private rented accommodation in many cases, very, very poor quality of supported accommodation. And this is what we end up with. And so the solution is very much going to be a political one rather than trying to run around fixing people who then get housed and someone else will drop down and they'll still be homeless. So if you only deal with it at an individual level, you won't actually reduce homelessness overall. All you do is just kind of keep rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic as we all go down. So yeah, check out the video if you're interested. I kind of explain what I said, but you might just be interested to see how the question works and how you can make a statement afterwards and how the response comes in for the council. We'll see if they actually arrange a meeting with me. I don't know if they will or not, but I do know I will continue raising this issue as loudly as I can do, because unless Bedford gets this right, they're going to be swamped. And it's a really good learning point for other councils who might be thinking about following the law. That would be nice. That if they do that without taking along their partners in the charity sector with them, then all they're going to do is basically get into a situation where Bedford's in. There's going to be this really dramatic net migration of people into the area who then use these services and effectively accrue local connection and remain there. So yeah, I hope that's interesting and helpful. As always, if you've got any questions about it, put it in the comments. We'll take it to the live stream or whatever, next live stream on a Thursday. It's recorded, so you don't have to watch it live, you can just watch the recording. But basically, that gives us a bit of space to just kind of answer technical questions in a bit more detail. And at some point, me and Shannon are going to record a video where we talk about kind of non-legal homelessness issues. I guess that's the way of saying it, or kind of the bigger picture stuff rather than individual kind of questions about the law. So keep an eye out for that. But yeah, as I say, here's the video. I hope it's interesting, and I'd hope it inspires you to ask some questions in your local council about whatever issue you care about, because what we've seen in Bedford is that a small number of people, as in for a lot of it was just me and my friend John Allen, in our spare time we were able to apply massive pressure to the council by just getting them to follow the law, and that led to this dramatic improvement in how they were delivering their homelessness services.
I would like now to ask Mr. Mike Hayden, please, to ask his question. I think it's a question to Councillor Martin Moraine Bryant, I believe.
Good evening, everyone. The question is that in recent years, Bedford Borough Council has explicitly committed to meeting its obligations under the Housing Act 1996, having previously upheld many complaints regarding its duties to homeless people. This has played a large role in the increase in people in temporary accommodation in the borough, particularly single homeless people, which has gone up by more than 5,000% since 2013, against a national increase of 200% in the same period. In my opinion, this commitment to not gatekeep opens up the possibility of genuine dialogue into understanding what can be done about this current bottleneck in temporary accommodation. I do not believe the council has fully understood the inflow of people from surrounding areas into local supported accommodation, where they accrue local connection and ultimately end up approaching the council's statutory services. I've worked in the homelessness sector in Bedford since 2005 and firmly believe that many hundreds of people have ended up housed in Bedford by Bedford Borough Council when they would have been preferred their own council to have housed them. The council already has data it needs to establish how significant an issue this is, as it records the 5-year address history of homeless and housing register applicants. Will the council therefore commit to and resource a robust data analysis exercise to establish how many people arrive in a borough supported accommodation without local connection, but subsequently accrue it, and then go on to approach our council for support, so that an informed and genuine discussion can take place amongst home services in Bedford?
Thank you very much. Would you like to reply?
Thank you, and thank you for advance warning of the question, as you also always give me at Housing Committee, and I really do appreciate that, so thank you for that. And thank you also, I think, for your kind of tacit support in some of the work that's been going on and that dialogue that, as you have just mentioned, is taking place, and I welcome that you've said that, so thank you very much. The officers do try to engage with the other authorities where somebody has presented from another area. That work does already take place, but I think it's worth also mentioning that a data study into that demand that you have just mentioned is being undertaken at the moment, and that's both into commissioned and non-commissioned, and that will include the local connection analysis data that, as you've raised, we can then inform future discussions on the issue with our partners. That does obviously then play into the temporary accommodation placement numbers. Obviously, this is an issue that you've raised with me before. It's something that we are, as I said, we are looking into as an authority. And when we have that data available, we can then discuss it further. And I also, as I said to you before, I think it'd be really helpful if we could have a conversation outside of this meeting as well to discuss your ideas and your thoughts about the future as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have a supplementary question or a short statement, please?
Yeah, I guess want to draw attention to the Supported Housing Act 2023, which has not actually been fully enacted yet. What they're looking at doing is putting standards or applying standards to supported accommodation, both unregistered and registered, which in effect is going to make it quite difficult to find people intentionally homeless because the quality of the support is going to be relevant there. Without going into too much detail, I think that's going to be a big issue for some of the providers because I think the quality of support is very poor, and therefore it's going to make this issue even more significant, I think. So I just want, I guess, people to be aware of that factor that's coming in at some point, hopefully this year.
Thank you.